Hey, my name is Owen Grady. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a second-floor apartment above a dry cleaner on the edge of downtown Hargrove, Indiana, a mid-sized city that most people drive through on the way to somewhere else, which suits me fine. I've been here 6 years. I know where the potholes are. I do technical documentation for a living. If you've ever opened a product manual or a compliance guide and thought, someone had to write this, that someone is probably a lot like me. I work for a small firm that contracts to manufacturers, mostly industrial equipment, occasionally medical devices. My job is to take something complicated and make it comprehensible to someone who does not care about the interesting parts. Only the part that tells them what to do and in what order. I am good at it. It does not make for interesting conversation at dinners I do not attend. The work is methodical. The days are quiet. I'm up at 6:30, make coffee in a French press I've had for 8 years, sit at my desk by 7:30, write technical language until 5 or sometimes 6, eat something I have made or ordered, watch an hour of television I mostly do not follow, and sleep before 11. On weekends, I run a route that takes me past the old rail yards and back through the warehouse district. I fix things when they break, the cabinet under the bathroom sink, a ceiling fan that wobbled, the bicycle I've owned since college and will own until it won't roll anymore. I don't fix things for other people, not because I'm unwilling, but because no one in my building knows me well enough to ask. The hallway neighbor on my floor is a woman in her 70s named Phyllis, who accepts packages for me when I'm out, and whom I have repaid with grocery runs twice during bad winters. We wave. Sometimes she tells me about her daughter in Phoenix. That's the sum of my social life in the building, and I've made my peace with that. The phone stays quiet after 8. I'm not complaining. I spent 27 years trying to be the kind of person other people noticed, and somewhere around 28 I understood that I was not wired for noise and I stopped apologizing for it. My best friend from college, a man named Terrence, who calls roughly once a month with the specific energy of someone who wishes I'd make more of myself, tells me I'm wasting the quiet years. I tell him the quiet years are the only ones I've figured out. He's not wrong, and neither am I, and we've agreed to keep having this conversation until one of us changes, or gives up. I was not expecting a knock at midnight on a Thursday in November. I was not expecting anything. 3 knocks. Not frantic. Not the pounding of someone who is panicking. 3 controlled knocks that had clearly been decided on, chosen over some louder version, kept deliberate. I had been awake. I sleep poorly in November. Always have. Sitting at my desk, rereading a section of a conveyor belt maintenance manual I'd been fighting with all day. I set the manual down. I opened the door. The woman standing in my hallway was wearing a black wool coat over what looked like clothes she'd had on since morning, a dark blazer, a silk blouse with a small stain near the second button that she either hadn't noticed or had stopped caring about. Heels she was still wearing, but barely. Her hair was dark, cut to the jaw, and on the left side it had come loose from wherever it was supposed to be and was sitting against her cheek. Her eyes were red in the specific way of someone who had been crying for a long time and had stopped recently enough that the evidence was still there. She was holding her phone in one hand, screen down, gripping it like she might throw it. She looked at me, then at the apartment number on my door, then at me again. "Apartment 2B, she said, confirming it. "Yes, you're Owen Grady." "I am." She exhaled. It was the exhale of someone who has been holding something for hours and has finally found the container to put it in. "My name is Claire Ashford. I own the building." I did not know I had a landlord with a name. I paid rent to a property management company online. I had never thought about who was above the property management company. "Okay," I said. "I need to ask you something that is going to sound insane," she said. "I need you to hear it before you close the door." I looked at her. The coat. The ruined hair. The stain on the blouse. The red eyes. The 3 controlled knocks she had chosen over the louder version. "Come in," I said. She sat at my kitchen table and put her phone face down on the surface and pressed both palms flat on either side of it, like she was steadying herself against a ship deck. I made tea. I made it without asking, because asking would have taken longer than doing it. She watched me. "I looked you up," she said. "Okay, you're not on social media. You have a LinkedIn with almost nothing on it. A review on a contracting site from 3 years ago that says you are, quote, meticulous and reliable and hard to talk to. 1 parking ticket in 2021. She looked at the tea I put in front of her. I needed someone who was not findable. I'm not sure I follow. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Ashford Capital is a privately held investment firm. I've run it for 7 years, since my father had his first stroke. We have 51 employees and a little over $800 million in assets under management. She said this the way I describe a conveyor belt specification, not proudly, just accurately. In 2 days, I'm presenting a term sheet for a merger with Renner Holdings. It's the largest deal of the firm's history. If it goes through, we're protected. If it doesn't, 3 of our key institutional partners have already signaled they'll withdraw, and the firm folds within 18 months. That's significant. Renner Holdings is run by a man named Charles Renner. He's 64. He is, by all ordinary metrics, a good businessman. He is also the kind of man who does not finalize major transactions with women he considers unstable. She looked at the mug. 2 weeks ago, his assistant reached out to request that I bring my husband to the closing dinner. I told them my husband had a prior commitment. His office called again this morning and told me, very politely, that Mr. Renner places significant value on the personal meeting and that attendance of both parties is standard for transactions of this magnitude. She paused. I don't have a husband. I've been divorced for 4 years. My ex-husband is currently living in Lisbon and would not do this even if I called, which I will not do. I was quiet for a moment. You need someone to be your husband for a dinner. Tomorrow evening. The Langford Hotel, 7 o'clock. Dinner, approximately 2 hours. The term sheet signing is the following morning. If Charles Renner believes I'm a stable, settled person with a life outside work, the deal moves forward. If he doesn't, she stopped. 51 people, she said quietly. 51 people who have given this firm 7 years. Some of them longer. I looked at her across the table. You own this building, I said. You looked me up. Of all the people in this building, or in any building you own, why my apartment specifically? She was quiet for a moment. You have no social media. You're not in any circle that touches Renner or his associates. You're a private contractor. No corporate affiliation. No conflict of interest. You don't have any obvious reason to tell anyone anything. She paused. And you've lived in this building for 6 years, and in 6 years not one maintenance complaint, not one late payment, not one single documented interaction with any other tenant or member of my management company. She looked at me. You are either the most self-sufficient person in the building, or the most invisible one. Either way, I need invisible. I looked at my hands on the table. I'll pay you, she said. Whatever is reasonable for 2 hours of your time. I don't want to be paid, I said, without quite deciding to say it. She blinked. What do you need me to know? I said. About the marriage. We sat at that kitchen table until 2 in the morning. She was direct and precise in the way of someone who manages large things. She gave me information in the correct order, answered follow-up questions fully, did not editorialize. They had met at a conference in Chicago 6 years ago. His name was Daniel. It had been a real marriage for 3 years, and then a quiet dissolution for 1 more, and then a legal finalization. He had wanted a different life. Less of what they'd built together, more of some version of himself he'd been suppressing. She had not wanted him to go, but she had not fought it, because she had understood that fighting would mean keeping a man who had already left in everything but the paperwork. She told me this the same way she had described the merger. Accurate, factual, the grief was in there somewhere, packed down into the specifics, but she was not showing it to me. I recognize this. It's how I talk about things that cost me. There had been someone before Daniel, too. A man she'd been with from 23 to 26, who had decided that a woman who wanted to run a firm rather than follow his career was not someone he wanted. He had said this using language about priorities and compatibility that she could still quote. I did not ask her to quote it. "What's my name?" I said. She looked at me. "If I'm your husband, what do you call me?" "Owen," she said. "I'll use your real name. It's easier to respond to. How long have we been married?" 2 years. We met 3 years ago at a work event, one of my annual client dinners. You were a guest of one of the portfolio company executives. We stayed in touch. She had clearly thought about this. We're private about the relationship, because I prefer to keep my personal life separate from business. That's true, actually. It's not a cover. It's just been true with you too, until tonight. I noticed she had slipped into the constructed version without marking the transition. "All right," I said. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not gratitude, not relief, more like the expression of someone who is used to things being difficult and has not yet updated for the thing being easy. "You haven't said yes," she said. I almost said I'd think about it. I had 2 chapters of manual to finish and a morning call with a client in Cleveland. I had the quiet November evening I had expected to have again tomorrow. I had, as I often had, a perfectly reasonable list of reasons not to step into something that wasn't mine. But there was the stain on the second button of her blouse, and the 3 controlled knocks, and the way she'd said 51 people with a quiet that was doing a lot of heavy lifting. "Yes," I said. She came back at 10 the next morning with a garment bag and a folder. The garment bag contained a navy suit she had guessed at my size for, correctly enough that it needed only minor adjusting at the shoulders. She had done this at a men's shop that opened early, which meant she had been awake and moving since before 8. The folder contained a 2-page brief, a document she had written herself, formatted with the same clean precision as every technical brief I had ever produced for someone else, covering the key facts of our constructed history, her business background, the relevant names I might encounter, and 2 or 3 conversational points she thought Charles Renner might raise. I read it at my desk while she sat on my couch and answered emails on her phone with the unself-conscious focus of someone who has always worked wherever they happen to be. "This is well organized," I said. She didn't look up. "I document things. It helps me think. I do the same." She looked up then. "You write manuals." "Technical documentation." "Yes, what does that actually mean day to day?" I set the folder down. "It means I take something that a team of engineers understands completely, and I figure out how to explain it to someone who has never seen it before. I have to understand it well enough to simplify it without losing the parts that matter." She was quiet. "That's harder than it sounds. Most things are." She went back to her phone. Then, after a moment, "The suit fits well enough at the chest. The shoulders will be fine if you don't reach for anything. I won't reach for anything. The corner of her mouth moved. Don't make promises you can't keep. We drove to the Langford in her car, which was a dark gray sedan that was clean and unremarkable, a choice I noted and did not comment on. She drove. I sat in the passenger seat with the brief on my knee, reading a second time. "Stop reading it," she said, 20 minutes from the hotel. "I'm making sure I have it. You have it. You read it twice. If you look at it again, you'll be in your head about it when we walk in, and that's worse than not knowing a date." She merged onto the highway. "Tell me something about yourself that isn't in the brief." I looked at the window. "I fix things. Not professionally. Just around the apartment. Broken things." "What kind of broken things?" "Anything. The ceiling fan. A bicycle. Last winter a shelf in Phyllis's apartment. She's my neighbor. She knocked on my door because she didn't know who else to ask, and the bracket had pulled out of the drywall. I refastened it properly. It took 20 minutes. "Phyllis," she said. "Is she the one who accepts your packages?" "You know about Phyllis. Building records. She's listed as an emergency contact for 3 tenants, including you." A pause. "Why is she your emergency contact?" I thought about this. She was the closest available person. "You've been there 6 years. "Yes, and she's your closest available person. She makes a good contact. She's always home." Claire looked at the road. "That's one of the saddest things I've heard this week," she said, without cruelty. I didn't argue. Charles Renner was exactly as she had described, 64, silver-haired, with the manner of a man who has made every room he has entered feel like a room he was lending to other people. He greeted her with the warmth of business regard, the version where warmth is a tactic rather than a feeling, and he greeted me with the specific appraisal of a man deciding what I was worth. I shook his hand. I looked at him the way I look at a piece of technical equipment I'm being asked to document, not with performance, just with attention. He held my eye for a beat longer than a standard greeting. I let him. "Owen," he said. "What is it you do?" "Technical documentation," I said. "Industrial and medical equipment mostly. I write the manuals." He looked at me with the slight recalibration of a man who expected something else. A writer. A translator. Closer to. I take what engineers know and turn it into something the rest of us can follow. He considered this. "That's useful work." "It's necessary work," I said. "There's a difference." He laughed. It was a real laugh, which surprised me. He moved us toward the table. Over dinner, he talked about consolidation strategy, about the regional markets he was entering, about what the merger meant for geographic coverage. Claire answered everything he said with the quick, complete precision of someone who had been building to this moment for 2 years. She knew his concerns before he named them. She had answers that were confident, but not aggressive. She gave him room to feel like the conversation was mutual. I watched her work. I had spent the previous evening thinking of her as someone in crisis. A woman who had knocked on a door at midnight with red eyes and a stained blouse. Watching her across a restaurant table, I understood that the woman who knocked on the door was the same woman who was here, and that the person in crisis had simply been carrying something too heavy to carry quietly. She was not diminished by the previous night. She was continuous with it. Renner asked me, around the entree, how I felt about Claire's work schedule. I looked at her across the table. She met my eyes with a stillness that I understood was trust. She was handing me the moment. "I work from home," I said. "I have a quiet job, and she has a loud one. That's not a problem. It's a balance." I looked back at Renner. "She carries a lot. It helps to have someone who doesn't add to the weight. Renner nodded. Something in him settled. After dinner, when Renner stepped away to speak with his associate, she leaned toward me. "That was the right thing to say," she said. Quietly, "I meant it," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Not long, but the kind of not long that holds something in it. We signed the valet ticket in the hotel lobby at 9:15. The drive home was quiet, in the specific way of quiet that happens when two people have just done something together and haven't yet decided what to say about it. She pulled up outside my building. The dry cleaner below my apartment was dark. The light in Phyllis's window was on. "The signing is at 10 tomorrow morning," she said. "You don't need to be there." "Okay, it worked," she said. "I think it worked." She kept her eyes on the building. "He'll call his associate tonight. His associate's red on dinner will matter." "But I think it worked." "I think so too." She was quiet. "Then, I owe you something." "You don't." "Owen," she said it in the tone of someone redirecting a meeting. "You gave up your evening." "You gave up your sleep," I said. "Last night. You were at a men's shop at 8 in the morning with a folder you'd already typed up. You had been awake." She didn't answer. "You carry a lot," I said. The same words I'd used at dinner. I meant it both times. Her hands were on the steering wheel. She wasn't gripping it, just resting on it. "I've been running that firm since I was 26, she said. "I've been the one who holds it together. The decisions. The hours. When my father got sick, when I took over, I just kept going." She stopped. "The divorce was 4 years ago, and I don't think I've stopped since. I'm not sure I know how." "You knocked on a door," I said, "at midnight. That was stopping." She turned to look at me. "That took something," I said. "Most people I know wouldn't have done it. They would have found another way to manage it, or they would have let the deal fail before they asked for help from a stranger." I looked at her. "You knocked on my door. That's not weakness. That's a different kind of decision." She was quiet for a long time. "I researched you," she said finally, "before I knocked. I read everything I could find. The LinkedIn, the contracting reviews, the parking ticket. I even read the lease you signed 6 years ago because the original signing notes were in the property file." She looked at the building. "The agent who showed you the apartment wrote a note that said, 'Quiet,' asked good questions about the ceiling insulation, seemed like someone who would stay." She paused. I read that note and I thought, yes, that one. My throat did something. "The ceiling insulation," I said. "The ceiling insulation," she said. I looked at the building for a moment. "Do you want to come up?" I said. "There's tea and I don't have anywhere to be." She stayed for 2 hours. We sat at the kitchen table again, but differently than before, without the folder between us, without the task, without the thing that needed to be solved by morning. She had taken her heels off at the door and was sitting with her feet tucked beneath her on the chair, which was the most informal I had seen her, and which changed the geometry of the room in a way I didn't look at too directly. She asked about the manuals. I told her about the conveyor belt I'd been fighting with all week, a specific section on diagnostic fault codes that was technically accurate, but structured in a way that made it incomprehensible in sequence. She leaned forward. She asked what was wrong with the sequencing. I explained it. She said, "You need to put the most common fault at the top regardless of code number. Nobody reads them in order. They read them when something breaks." I looked at her. "That's exactly right," I said. "How do you know that?" She said, "Because I write procedures for people who are panicking, and panicking people go straight to whatever matches what's in front of them." We talked about the firm. about what it was like to make large decisions in small amounts of time, about the pressure of knowing that other people's stability is attached to your own. She talked about it without drama, just tracing the outlines of it, the same way I described the fault codes. I told her about Terrence and his monthly calls, about the wasting the quiet years. She thought about this for a while and said, "I don't think you're wasting them. I think you're building something that doesn't have a name yet." Around 11:30, she said she should go and meant it. I walked her to the door. She put her heels back on, tucking her hand briefly against the door frame for balance. "Thank you," she said, "for last night and tonight both. You're welcome." She looked at the apartment, at the desk with the manual on it, at the chair where she'd been sitting, at me. "I'd like to come back," she said. "Not for a reason, just to talk." "I'd like that," I said. She left. I stood in the doorway for a moment after the elevator closed. Phyllis's door was still showing light under the... I knocked softly, and she opened it in her robe. "Saw a car out front," she said. Not nosily, just observantly. "A friend," I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been alive long enough to know what a friend means when it's said that way. "Well," she said, "it's about time," and went back inside. The merger signed at 10 the following morning. I know this because she texted me at 10:23. It went through. "Thank you, Owen." Then, 2 minutes later, the fault code section should be reorganized by frequency, not by code number. Just so you know. Then, after a pause, "I'd like to see you this weekend, if you're willing." I wrote back, "Saturday. I'll make coffee. You bring whatever is broken." She sent back a single question mark. I wrote, "You mentioned once that the reading lamp in the lobby of this building flickers. If you're coming anyway, you might as well bring the bulb." It took her a few minutes. Then, "It's not the bulb. The wiring in that fixture hasn't been properly grounded in years." "Then bring whatever you need to fix it," I wrote. "I'll help." That was 11 months ago. The merger was, by any measure, the right decision. Ashford Capital absorbed a regional portfolio that stabilized the firm's asset base. 3 of the institutional partners who had signaled doubt renewed their agreements. 2 of the 51 employees got promoted. The lobby lamp no longer flickers. She had it rewired properly by a licensed electrician who she hired after I diagnosed the grounding problem from the junction box. And she was right. It was never the bulb. She still works the hours she has always worked. She has not stopped. I don't think she is built to stop, and I've stopped thinking that needs to change. What I understand now, 11 months on, is that she's been carrying the firm the way a load-bearing wall carries a house. Not dramatically, not loudly, just continuously. And without that specific piece, the whole structure fails. My job, I've come to understand, is not to take the weight from her, but to be in the same building when she puts it down. Terrence called in September. I told him I was seeing someone. He was quiet for an unusual amount of time, and then said, "Tell me everything," which I did, including the part about the midnight knock and the folder and the parking ticket, and the ceiling insulation note, and by the end of it he was laughing in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. "Only you," he said. "Only you would have a love story that starts with property management records." I told him it started with 3 controlled knocks and a folder. He said that was somehow worse, and also the best thing he'd heard all year. Phyllis was at the building holiday party in December, which Claire hosted, and which I attended, and which was the first time the 2 of them met. Phyllis had Claire's arm within 4 minutes. She told her about the shelf bracket. She told her I had come and gone and come back and fixed the same shelf twice before discovering the original installation had been done into false drywall and the whole bracket needed different anchors. He didn't complain, Phyllis said. He just came back. Claire looked across the room at me with an expression I recognized by then. The one she had when something confirmed something she'd already believed. She moved in at the end of January, not dramatically, she had a key already. And the move was mostly books and 2 plants and the lamp from her office that she'd wanted in a room with better morning light. The apartment is quieter than it was in one sense, and fuller in another. She works at one end of the desk, and I work at the other. She fixes the things she knows how to fix. I fix the ones she doesn't. I'm still writing manuals. I finished the conveyor belt documentation in December, reorganized by fault frequency, and the client called it the clearest technical document they'd received in 12 years. I did not tell him that the reorganization had been suggested by a CEO who had been sitting in my kitchen in her socked feet at 11 o'clock at night. Some sources you keep. I used to think that documentation was about taking something complicated and making it simple. I've revised that. What it actually is making something navigable. You can't make a conveyor belt simple. It isn't simple. But you can write a path through it that someone can follow when the thing breaks and they need to know what to do next. That's different from simple. That's useful. I had a document for my own life for 6 years. It said, quiet, asks good questions, seems like someone who would stay. I thought that was a small document. It turned out to be the whole thing. It turned out someone had read it carefully at midnight, before she knocked.